Hi guys, welcome to another Code Films. Well, in this code film, I want us to look at fixes. You know what? I was writing some, just some SQL statements here and there. Then I had this error, and this error is what led to this code film. It's a fix. It's not our usual code films of stories and possible scenarios, but I think it has to be addressed because it helps you to appreciate software engineering when it's presented in an abstract way, especially when you are learning it for the first time and then you hear some of encapsulation, um, abstraction, you hear something about dynamic allocation of memory. All these things are all abstract. So, in what context or in what scenario do we see all working at once? So we know that what we are learning is not more of conceptual or it has no practical relevance. So let's just get into it. So this was the error I encountered. Error code 1045. That's the error. The response I had from the server. It says access denied for user test user at localhost using a password. Yes. So I'm working with my SQL workbench, and my SQL workbench. That's the it's a data. We are looking at my SQL as a database management system to help us with all our everything that has got to do with databases and users and access rules and what have you. So it's analogous to saying something like you're learning, um, or maybe you're learning a framework like Spring or Java or something just to build web application. In the same way, MySQL and SQL helps MySQL and MySQL, sorry, MySQL and SQL helps you to build programs around what do you call it? Around databases. So anything that's got to do with databases, um, those are the tools or the language you need to, the tools and language you need to get that work done. So this was the response we had from the server because a client was making a request to the server. That's the MySQL server, and then this is the response we had from the server. And this is the error message that is being displayed over here. So how did I go about resolving this? Let's go back to the error message again. So it says grant all privileges to test user, and it didn't work. So first, as usual, we always have to go by a modular approach to understand what the problem is, and you have to really do a lot of research, a lot of documentation reading. That's the only way that you can really solve some problems. It's good to Stack Overflow here and there, but sometimes you have to go the very hard way of sitting down and breaking down the problem into models. So first of all, I looked at the response. It's coming from the server. Then with the servers, with understanding of what MySQL Server does, let's just go into a few. So first of all, I had to understand what MySQL Server, what was the purpose of the MySQL Server, and it listens for network connections from client programs and manages access to the database on behalf of those clients. So that was one bit that I picked, net connections. So I'm trying to perform an action. Is it in the same connection or is it in a different connection? That's a catch. You should keep that in mind. I'm performing an action or um, I'm performing a statement or I'm querying in the database in one connection, but the response I'm getting is not the response I wanted, and that's because of the connection that I am in. And also, let's go back and see what other queues. So we looked at was and then some as well as the connection. So the connection is the facility that helps you to talk to your database. This facilities. It's more of I'll say it's like a pipe. It's the pipe to your database so you can talk to your database. And we are running at localhost. And then when you want to use the GUI, you have to the MySQL D is the GUI for sorry is the command line for if you don't use the GUI, you can use the MySQL D. Simple as that. That's the daemon, or yeah, that's the server. And we are creating a user. We're trying to grant privileges, and we had to use PowerShell. So I just want us to go straight into it too, so we can start something. These are all the references that help in assisting. It's very technical, but let's stick to what I said, that it's going to be about context, connections, and users. So let's go straight into it. Alright, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to create a user. First of all, let's look at this very carefully. Let's go back here. Let me save this file. I'll come back to it. That's why. Alright, so these are MySQL connection. I already have test user. I will create a different user. And you are trying to start a connection. So first of all, we can create a new connection, or we can use an existing connection. So let's use an existing connection so we can perform our work very well. I don't need a new connection because I may lose some of my script stuff written. For the purpose of this work, just a fix so we can fix the error. Alright, so let's use the tutorials. So good. Now I want us to look at something over here with regards to the root. Alright, so when this connection was created, the user to the database was the root user. And with MySQL, we have system users and regular users. Some users that you create by default are some users are provided by default when you install MySQL. An example is the root user. Yeah. So with the root user, he has some number of privileges that he is assigned to, and that makes him the root user. That's like the boss user. But you as a administrator, you can also create different users, and that can also make your work, or whatever business requiremements or business logic that has been drafted for any scenario that you have in mind. Then you go about how you create your users, or user roles. Alright, so let's log in with this password. Okay, so you realize that we are now in the we are now in the tutorials connection, and our user is a root user. So let's create a different user, and let's look at the context that we've been making mention of. So we're going to say create user. What's the name of the user? We'll name the user CodeFilms, and then the user we are creating, we want him to be tagged to which server, or which database, which server, and that the server is the localhost server, because that's what we have already on our uh, on our on our system. We are not connecting to a remote server. The user is not um, going to access any remote server. He's accessing the localhost server. That's the MySQL server that we have on our localhost. So we have defined that if we had a different MySQL server sitting somewhere in this world, we would have we would have done the same, but that's not the case for this. So we are creating the user CodeFilms, and we want to give it a password identified by what password. The password we give is, let's make it simple, CodeFilms, CodeFilms, CodeFilms. Yep. So we're going to execute our statement now. So we've created our user. Now there's a probability of you thinking that once your user has been created in this context, please look at this connection context. You can easily go into another connection context and grant him all the privileges. Now, if you do that, you get that error. So let's go with that approach. So we've created a user here, and now let's go and log in into a different. Let's create a new connection and log into the database using this CodeFilm's user. So let's do that. Let's create a new connection, and then we'll name this connection what we'll name it CodeFilm's connection. Connection, and then the host name is localhost. Then that's the default port for MySQL Server. Then the user is no longer root user. The user we created is CodeFilms. Now let's test the connection and see if the user was our user is created, and also if our connection to the database will be successful with this user. So our user is registered now. The password is CodeFilms. So you see our connection was successful. Alright. So this is our CodeFilms connection. Now, due to the spatial, or not even spatial, but the abstract way of sometimes facing software, or how we presume you think software will work, you may think that right now that I've logged into CodeFilms with a different connection, and you see CodeFilms is not a root user, and root users have some number of privileges. I'll pop all this up in the documentation. When we are done, I'll go over the documentation for you to see the, not evidence, but what MySQL documentation says. So now you are here, and you say I want to grant all the privilege, because in this connection we can't see any databases here, but in our previous connection all our databases are showing. But in this fresh new connection with the user CodeFilms, no database shows, nothing shows at all. So we have to, and that's because of privileges. Privileges lets you know which objects you can see, tables, views, databases. That's the work of the privileges system in MySQL. So let's grant all privileges in this context, which is wrong because the CodeFilms context has no, this the CodeFilms context is a created user, is a user created user, is not a root user. The default root user is something that you have created, so you have to give him some certain properties. But with regards to the root user, there are some default privileges that have been given to him already. But this one is a freshly created user entering into a system, so he has to be assigned certain roles, privileges, just like a student that is coming to a university. As he's coming, he's a fresher. So once he enters the fresher, the system is going to be groomed and, you know, groomed, bred to a different being all together. If it's a pharmacy student, he's going to look like a pharmacy student. If it's a engineering student, he's going to be groomed as an engineering student. So we want to grant all privileges. So we say grant all privileges, and we say that's grant all privileges to these databases. The first asterisk is for the database and then table. So we are granting all the privileges to all the database and tables that we have available and on I think I've lost the syntax for on to so let's assign grant all privileges on this, grant all the privileges that is found within this all the database and all the tables to CodeFilms to CodeFilms and then his location. That's the server that he is located on. And then he is located on the MySQL localhost server. He is not sitting on any remote server. Yes, we grant all the privileges on all the database and all the table to CodeFilms. That's the user CodeFilms. And where is he? He is found on the localhost server. That's the MySQL server that's running locally. If you execute this, you see you're going to get that error again. Let's pull a magnifier. Is you are having the same error once again, and the reason is because of context, the context that we are inside, the connection that we have established, and then the user that has been created. He's not a default user that was created. He's a created user from an administrator's point of view, so he has to be assigned rules. So he can't assign to his own self certain privileges. It has to be done by the root user, because the root user has some number of privileges that has been assigned to him. I hope it makes sense. Hmm. So let's exit the magnifier. Okay, so we see we have this error now. Let's go back to our main root user. This is our root user with the connection, and let's grant those privileges. So we'll grant all privileges on all the database, all the tables to CodeFilms, and CodeFilms is on the localhost. So you said this has been successful. So right now, if you have to go back here, and let's log in back again. Alright, now you see all the databases are showing, but as compared to the previous previous what we just had previously, what we went through previously, we realized that there was no database that was showing, no tables, nothing. And the reason is because of the context, the privileges system in MySQL. So let's go into our referencing to appreciate it more. So it's not just theoretical. Alright, so these are some of the references that will assist you if you don't really get this CodeFilm, but it's quite elaborate. I wouldn't want to. And so one big catch you can use is that once connected to a database server, the program uses the current session to execute SQL statements in that context. So that's one catch you can take away. So you have to understand that it's being done in a context form. And another catch you can also take away too is queues. Let me use queues more. Alright. Another queue you can take away is that the privileges granted to a MySQL account determine which operations the account can perform. MySQL privileges differ in context in which they apply and at different levels of operation. Administrative privileges enable users to manage operation of the MySQL server. These privileges are global because they are not specific to a particular databases. We also have database privileges which apply to database and to all objects within it. These privileges can be granted for specific databases or globally so that they apply to all databases. And we also have privileges for database objects such as tables, indexes, indexes, views, and stored routines can be granted for specific objects within a database. And it goes on to say that privileges also differ in terms of whether they are static, built into the server, or dynamic. Whether a privilege is static or dynamic affects its ability. Read it very well. Whether a privilege is static or dynamic affects its ability to be granted to users' accounts and roles. So for more information about static and dynamic privileges, it gives you a link to the next reference. So it says information about the account privileges is stored in the grant tables and what have you. So at least you can have you do appreciate that there's more to it than just uh, try and error. You have to really take your time and just comb through your documentation and search for what you are searching. And as usual, it's always good to go with a modular approach to solve your problem. Start with what you don't understand. Where is the response coming from the server? Um, did I create a new connection, local host? You have to just take your time and get and get it done. It will definitely come out successfully. So PowerShell, what did I use PowerShell for? Let's go into that. MySQL acts like a single multi-threaded program. So there are cases whereby you want to have multiple instances of the server will be running and you want to perform a certain operation. It's not going to allow you to do that unless you kill one of the server. Um, yeah, so that was what I used the PowerShell for. Probably I'll have to create a different code film for that scenario, but okay, let me see. No, let's make it for another code film. But that's what I used the PowerShell from. That was the tool I used to kill some of the processes that was preventing my SQL from running. When I was trying to debug the issue. Yep. So that's it for this code film. As usual, this will be a freestyle code film. It's not our usual code film, but it's a fix. So please, um, I'll leave the link in the description and also um, the cues as well to be provided in the description. So as usual, modular approach, you have to just query and do Google, but have a modular approach to Google, understand what you're looking for, and then always work with the documentation. So the catch, so our takeaway here is context and a privilege system. So software is not abstract. You can, I can actually, I don't know, but I think I can see a whole lot of encapsulation happening here, a whole lot of the new operator being used here, and some form of interfaces and um, interfaces or inheritance, not inheritance per se, but interfaces like overriding methods with polymorphism, all that happening in this small scenario of context, connections, and users. And probably I'll try my best to create a code sampling for that one, just something to help you to appreciate the error more, maybe using Java. Yeah, so that would be for this code film. As usual, if you comment, like, and do subscribe. Thank you.